Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. Hey legends, welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today it is Ayden and I, but we also have a special guest, someone very close to home, close to our heart, and it was only fitting to have our father, Nick Doumtsis, on as the first guest of the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and hello out there to everyone.
So today's going to be a bit of a background story, a bit of an origin story for Ayden and I, covering sort of our introduction to bow hunting and the outdoors, and hence why we've brought Dad along for the journey to give a bit more depth to the story and really sort of fill in some of the stuff we've probably forgotten about, especially in the early days, and just explain getting kids into the outdoors and especially hunting and some of the challenges and sort of why Dad did it really. So we'll dive in.
So for those of you that don't know our story, James and I are twins, hence the name Twin Elements. We have essentially been hunting since the age of 4. We were introduced to the great outdoors by our parents, Nick and Aliki. Dad has been a massive influence now for over 25 years, obviously prompting us to get into hunting from a very, very early age, where we initially would go on hunts with him and adventures to a property that we had huge place in our heart. We essentially had a property in southern New South Wales with a little hut or a shack on it, and that was a place where we would go with family and friends and spend basically all of our school holidays up until the age of around 18 just going about our endeavours in the great outdoors. Throughout that process, we sort of learnt initially what hunting was, what the outdoors were, and got immersed in all things outdoors.
We want to know why did you get us into bow hunting and all hunting and the outdoors specifically? Like, it would have been a lot easier for you to just leave us at home, I guess, with mum and head out for yourself. You probably would have been a lot more successful. So what was the thinking and thought process behind that?
It was never ever about hunting. It always started off with just you guys being close to me and doing what I enjoyed, which hunting was a huge part, obviously, but it was just more appreciation of the outdoors. I've got a very, passionate about Australian wildlife, especially birds, and just enjoying Mother Nature. And my workplace deals with a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of conversation. Sometimes just escaping is what sort of fed my soul. And obviously you guys were the love of my life in essence, because once you guys come along, my ability to blend the outdoors and also be a parent was very hard. So I was never putting a bow in your hand at 4, of course. We were just teaching you guys basics, going outdoors and I guess developing a relationship with Mother Nature. That was the first and foremost steps of your journey with me.
That's definitely from my perspective, one of the biggest lessons that you instilled in us is definitely the appreciation for nature, just being extremely patient and observing. We learned a lot of skills through observing about how the world works, the circle of life, inputs and outputs into things like death and life and what essentially is out there in the real world, and learning that through watching I remember at quite a young age, obviously, you would take us along on these stalks on feral pigs. And I remember there were times where we had slingshots and things, and that progressed to a video camera, and then that progressed to our own bow, and so forth. But in the early days, there were times where you'd just take us along, get to 30 or 40 metres of a mob of rutting pigs. And in that last few steps to get into bow range, you'd sort of sit us there and explain to us what you were going to try and do and what was going on. And then obviously go in and execute the stalk. If it went to plan, obviously a lot of the time it didn't, having 2 young kids in tow and the way that animals move and things and terrain and topography. But if everything did go to plan and you were able to, successfully take an animal, then running us through why you did it, how it impacts the property owners, what we can take, what meat from that animal, what impact that has on the greater ecosystem, all of these life lessons that essentially stemmed from getting us out the door as 4-year-olds, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that just come to mind then was, even before that started, you guys would come for quite a long track out, it could be hours, and we'd have a little backpack each, and you had your water bottle and you'd collect things. And I remember, credit to my beautiful wife, Aliki, she would have an exercise book where you guys would stick things down and make notes and make references to feathers, tracks and things like that. We, funny enough, still have those exercise books. We look back, I think you were 4 or 5, maybe 6, but it was just your own little diary, I guess, of Mother Nature. And then obviously that evolved to tracking your own, foxes, pigs, etc. with a bow. So, everything starts somewhere, and it was a beautiful journey, good transition where you just sort of learn the basics, bird calls, even I think just recently we went on a hunt and you were saying, oh, something's coming out. And it was just the fact that you identified that a kangaroo, the ear went up, twitched, and it turned because it obviously can hear something. And I remember you picking up on that when, this is Ayden, sorry, when, they were probably 10 years old, and he'd be pointing the finger at me saying, hey, something's coming. So, obviously you got to do apprenticeship somewhere, and you guys had many years in the bush to learn your craft and become, the people you are today.
I'm sure somewhere along the line there was a few pop up in my mind anyway. Stalks and encounters that we might have blown. I imagine taking twin boys out in the bush from the age of 4 was full of its challenges, especially in those final moments of the stalk. Obviously, people aren't as quiet at the best of the time, let alone telling 2 little kids to sit still or be quiet. So is there any sort of stories that come to your mind, I guess?
I think there's so many, but one that comes to mind that actually scared me, but thinking back now, it's sort of funny. We're on a channel, it was a bit of a swampland, so this was a channel that serviced the road, then obviously dipped off quite aggressively and went into some lowlands where this property in particular flooded at a certain time, and the pigs were out in sort of knee-deep water rooting up Kabungi. And I left both you guys on a comfortable spot with the backpacks and everything, and I went into the water. And I was just drawing on the pig. It was a good-sized boar, actually. Couldn't see if it had hooks, but it was a decent-sized boar for that property. And I can hear some screaming. I'm thinking, oh, my God, is it a snake bite? Have they been bitten by something? So I just, the stalk was over because the pig saw my movement. I turned around. And as I got back, I found both you guys punching on because someone caught someone's lizard, and you're fighting over a lizard. And it was a serious punch on, and I just had to shake my head and think, well, it's part of the process, I guess.
So obviously it's interesting because we've got, the benefit of foresight and seeing how things have played out, where, we obviously hunt now as a trio. James and I are very immersed into doing it as, a bit of a lifestyle at this point with Twin Elements. So I sort of feel like I know the answer, but if there are any parents out there with young boys or girls, kids essentially, that are looking to, have a bit of incentive to take them hunting, or any words of wisdom or anything like that, do you have anything that you can lend towards them?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't change anything. I think as a parent with young children going into the bush, you have to be very patient, be also very aware of, their child's energy levels and enthusiasm. So I remember seeing pigs out, and I was so excited, but it was at the end of the day, obviously, that magic hour. But we'd been out, and the boys would walk quite far distance. They were both very energetic, and I couldn't drum up the same enthusiasm in them as I had for these big pigs. They just wanted to go home. They were tired. They were hungry. So, you have to work in their time frame because they're young people. But I would, like I said, take a lot of photos, a lot of videos, a lot of memories, because you'll look back and it'll be no trophy can ever replace the joy that you have in just taking that journey with them into teaching them the passions that you also enjoy. So it's hard work, but I think in the end it's going to be very rewarding, especially now when I look at both boys and the commitment they put into their their lifestyle and what they'll be able to produce. And be amazing role models for other future bow hunters out there.
It really doesn't sound too dissimilar, to be honest, from guiding adults a lot of the time, to be honest. Like obviously a lot of planning beforehand, talking about, perceived outcomes and expectations and things, what you're trying to achieve from the day, making it fun, explaining sort of why you're doing things can often help, keep people's motivation up there. But then obviously I continue to look back at photographs from our young days, and like every second photo, there's a photo of us with a roll up in our hand or a lunchbox of some description, even while on the hunt or while stalking pigs. So just making sure that, your kids are obviously fed, always have things like that. There's times where we're looking through binoculars the wrong way, but just the fact that we're participating and trying to look at things is obviously, a testament to you including us. The fact that we had camo clothes on, but probably weren't, if we're running around screaming, it's not really going to, deceive anything through the camouflage. But it's just all those little things, feeling included, having our own backpacks and things, so that when we go home and share these stories as 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds to our friends at school for show and tell, like you said, with these books, it just makes you feel, pretty triumphant, pretty chuffed that...
Oh, you're invested.
Yeah, and you're contributing to this big process where you also get to take meat home and eat meat for the family and things like this, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think having your own gear, keeps you invested, and definitely those breaks and food and water. But I mean, yeah, like binoculars definitely springs to mind. Even as a young kid, like you don't think, well, what's a 5 to 15-year-old going to spot that I'm not going to spot first? Well, that is probably true, but even just the fact of them like looking around, like they might be looking at, up in the trees half the time, or be looking through it backwards. But I mean, it's the principle of just like keeping them entertained and keeping them in the bush for as long as possible. That's like the real challenge at those early ages. Like it's more just making it as comfortable as possible. And whether that's through, appropriate gear, it doesn't even need to be necessarily camouflage gear. Like it could just be like a green shirt and a pair of footy shorts or whatever that, and a good pair of runners or a good pair of boots. But just trying to make it's like Ayden said, it's so much more like guiding really, where there's so much more planning that goes into it, in terms of you're thinking about every possibility that could go wrong and trying to mitigate that to make it as enjoyable as for them as possible. And, maybe sitting off a scrape for 5 hours or something like that isn't probably going to be the best hunt for a sub 10-year-old when they don't really understand the point. They'd probably more enjoy just walking around the mountains with their mum or dad and going for that hunt and looking at birds and looking under rocks and, logs and stuff, and hopefully not finding snakes, but hopefully potentially finding snakes, but, finding lizards and frogs and all the rest of it. Because I think that's what really grew the foundation for us to become the people and hunters, and probably even got us into this lifestyle where, we're prepared to sacrifice a hunt to get it on film, because at the end of the day, the hunt and the kill process isn't the be all and end all. Like the whole journey for us now has become so much more important than that, 20-second kill shot that you get. It's so much more than that. And that's, like I said, that's probably why we've dived so much into the media side of things, and really try to invest our time in growing this community and growing that sort of culture for other people, because we like hunting and the outdoors has given so much to us, and we just feel so passionately about sort of sharing that and giving that back to the wider community.
I think that feeds into, there definitely would have been a time when we were, in that 5 to 10 period where on 80% of our hunts or stalks, a bird would call, whether it was a magpie or a willy wagtail or a kite or something like that, and Dad would stop a stalk or stop a hunt and be like, who heard that? And, one of us would answer, yep, I did. All right, what bird do you think that was? And I didn't really quite hear it. And we'd sit there and wait and try and identify where the bird was and look through bird books and things like that. And that's something that we still do. We did it this year in the Northern Territory. We had a bird book sitting on the dash of my car as we travelled around the countryside looking for, different parrots, finches, all these things that most people would not even have any, association towards. It's just a bird in a tree, or they wouldn't even realise it. Whereas, we've taken on these lessons and things. And I remember like looking at what scat is that? And sure, it's a wombat scat, but it's by seeing it, you're not going to get it confused with the feral pig scat. And by knowing what a feral pig scat looks like, you're not going to get it confused with X, Y, Z. And it just continues and, adding to this database. And the sooner you can get kids doing that and being excited by it. And again, it's like school. You don't necessarily need to know what colour well, you do as an adult, but, that's the color green. Good job, Johnny, or, Susie or whatever. But the more you can add little like quizzes and games and things like that kids build on from an early age in the bush, whether it's, what bird is that, or what type of pasture is that, or it adds up later on where you go, okay, I've just seen a whistling duck make that, or I've heard a whistling duck make that call. I've seen a bunch of them fly off from that direction. Now I'm going to go over there because I'm assuming there's a dam. And then you find the dam and you find a wallowing boar. And that's just building the building blocks to be, one, better naturalists and outdoors people, but two, it's going to benefit you as a hunter later on when you are our age now, for James and I. And so many of those like life lessons and skills of just being observant as kids have definitely carried through. Originating in Texas, USA, Numa Outdoors has formulated a durable, breathable, quiet and comfortable camouflage lineup for all terrain, seasons and pursuits. You may have seen us across our socials running the new Renegade lineup in our recent Northern Territory adventures. We're pleased to announce that the Numa camouflage lineup is stocked exclusively by Venture Hunting Outdoors in Australia and available now. Head to their website to check out the range today.
I think another major topic was like what was the deciding factor in the decision behind us getting our first bows, and what sort of characteristics did you see in us as, young men or maybe potentially in the outdoors or hunters that, you're like, okay, it's actually time to transition these boys from being an observer to actually being an active hunter and having our own bows?
Good question. I think twofold. Firstly, you guys earned the right because you were definitely stalking into very close bow range to game animals, rabbits, foxes, pigs even. I remember at a very early age, and it scared the pants off me, Ayden had his first camera and he said, "Dad, can I go and take a photo of those kangaroos?" I said, "Sure." And he got to about 2 meters of a massive buckaroo. And it wasn't until he stood up, because he was actually crouched down and, he was blended in the mob. And I looked at him from 20 meters and I ended up jumping up and carrying on, because I just thought, he got so close, and, it was a terrifying moment there. But, both boys were blessed with very good stalking skills. So that first foremost, they were, obviously can get into bow range. But second, I guess, strength-wise, I think it wasn't until about 12 years old where they can actually pull back a bow that was going to equate to, having the logistics, or I guess to be able to take out an animal. And I think we started off with rabbits and foxes, and then we eventually built up over the years to larger pigs. So everything, fell into place, I guess. So
I think early days as well, you had shown us quite a lot that the stalk and making sure everything was right was more important than just shooting something for the sake of shooting something. And that's where like proficiency, I remember in the early days when we got our bows, we obviously wanted to go hunting because we knew how to stalk and hunt things. But I remember like the immense, practicing and training that you put us through of just shooting targets every day in the backyard from 10, 20, 30 meters. Like that was a long distance from us. I'd also remember that like, because we were anticipating hunting rabbits and foxes, you would tie up like a little plastic water bottle with a bit of string, throw it 20, 30 meters away and pull it in and pretend to like squeak, do that fox squeaking noise through your lips. And then as it would get closer, you'd stop it and we'd have like 2 or 3 seconds to be stable on it, or we'd have to identify that, the fox was about to move or this water bottle was about to move, and we'd have to wait for the next opportunity. Obviously making sure it's safe on like grassed areas with a good backdrop and things like that. But we were really emulating what it would be like to hunt, and aiming small, missing small, like all those lessons. Like you'd have us running up and down the hills and then come back and then shoot our bows under pressure. If we missed the target, obviously we like didn't go hunting. If we did a perfect bullseye repeatedly, we were ready to go to the next step. Just things like that, like doing push-ups before shooting, all this stuff. Like it was honestly like training for a sport, because it had such big ramifications in the field when you're hunting actual live living animals. So
yeah, 100%. I remember those days. And like I said, you've had so many years of just sitting there in the shadows watching me hunt, I guess, and you had an amazing apprenticeship. So I think, with whether it's your son or your daughter, I think if you, and each to their own, they're all going to do it differently, but I just wanted to make sure that when you do pick up a bow and an arrow and you're going to take a life, that you were going to do it properly. And I think, we had a lot of magazines, a lot of DVDs that we watched, a lot of practical stuff, like you said. So, and obviously a lot of experience. So
I still remember all the times running up and down in the backyard and trying to get our heart rate up as much as possible. And you'd have the bow sitting there with an arrow on, and you'd like come back and you'd be like, and you're like puffing, and I'd be like, nah, not enough. Go do another lap. You go do another sprint, come back, do a couple of push-ups, and be like, you start like shaking on your 10th push-up or something like that, and you'd be like, righto, now's the time. And then you'd sit there and do the ugliest draw you could like possibly imagine to get the bow back. Then you're like trying to settle the pin, and then, you do a perfect shot and you're stoked. But yeah, I was just trying to emulate the buck fever and, the adrenaline dump that you're going to get, especially, obviously trying to draw back and hold the pin on your first critter or your first rabbit or whatever, your 100th rabbit really, just trying to get on top of the adrenaline and the excitement. And honestly, it did help a lot. But I think another thing was the practice in terms of like shot placement. Obviously, we'd spend a lot of time with Dad, watching Dad stalk animals and whatnot. But also, I remember sitting down, especially when we were little kids, and this is probably going back to the earlier years, where I remember one of our uncles, and he tells the story all the time, but he came to the back of our car and we're sitting in the back of the car both reading hunting magazines, and we were only 5 or 6 years old, and he always said, he's like, I knew you guys this would become your everything, because he goes like, you just had no choice, like this was going to be your sort of destiny and become who you guys are, because like even from the age of 5 years old, like that's all you guys wanted to do. But I think with the hunting magazines, like we spent so much time looking at them and looking at pictures, like obviously nowadays with social media and the knowledge that sort of that's progressing and sharing, but also with YouTube channels and stuff like that. But back then hunting magazines were king. And I remember sitting down with Dad before we went on all these hunts and everything like that. And, we'd look at animals, whether it was people's trophies or live game photos of rabbits or whatever, pigs, goats, and, we'd sit there with a pen and you'd have to sort of mark out on the magazine or where you actually want to shoot, and Dad would be like, oh, yep, no, that's a good shot, or no, maybe you're a little bit far back or a little bit high or whatnot. The arrow might, the pig or goat might turn, or it might do this, and you try and run through all these and anticipate all its moves. And yeah, ultimately it was just trying to be as ethical hunters as we possibly could, because at the end of the day we are hunting an animal, and we do want to do the best that we can to strive for the best welfare and secure that meat, but also just make sure that it's done as cleanly and ethically as possible.
For the record, can I ask you guys a question? We've been on a lot of hunts together, but in the early ages, what was your first aha moment where you had buck fever, where your heart was just pounding out of your chest? Because Ayden was quite successful very early on deer, which is pretty, it's a huge accolade to have, because I think you only had the bow for 3 or 4 years, and I think you got your first Samba, or was it? I can't remember what it was, but yeah.
For me, it definitely dates back to one hunt I have in my mind is you were cutting timber here in Victoria on a small private property, and you had enough faith in James and I to obviously go for a stalk and try and get a rabbit or fox or something like that. I can't actually remember if I'd ever taken an animal with the bow, but I just remember heading up to this sort of high ridge on my own, and as I was cruising up the hill, had the wind in my face, was sort of early afternoon, managed to make my way up there, and I sort of got to this spot where I was coming up to essentially a rabbit warren was on the opposite side of the ridge, and I was going to come up and use this large gum tree as a bit of cover and then peek around it, and should have only been within 20 metres of essentially the rabbit warren. And as I was popping up, I was sort of thinking, oh, geez, I wonder if I'm going to see like a Samba deer down in the gully or something like that. My mind was sort of wandering into the next thing. And I just remember seeing as I sort of were cresting the ridge, and luckily I did actually anticipate like, oh, I shouldn't silhouette myself, which is a lesson that you taught us earlier. I'll go to that tree first and then pop my head over for a rabbit. And to be honest, I think in my head or my heart, I thought that the rabbits would have been in their burrows still because it was quite early. But to my surprise, I saw this really red, crimson, furry bottom with a white tip tail sort of sitting there at 15 to 20 meters. And I remember just going, holy crap, like that is a fox. Like my recognition was essentially like saw it, ducked to my knees and put an arrow on in within a second as stealthily as I could. But I just remember like as I went to stand up, I just remember that my heart pounding and like it was honestly beating out of my chest. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to be able to shoot this. I can't like, and then I like peered up and I'm like, it's probably not even going to be there. And I looked up again and it was still there. And I remember being like, oh, okay, great, it's there. Like you've got a little bit of time to work your stuff out. Didn't have a rangefinder back in those days. It was too early. Made sure I didn't have a rabbit judo on and had a shaving sharp broadhead that Dad had sharpened for me back at the car a little bit earlier. And anyway, peered over the ridge and I'm like, oh, he must only be 15 meters away. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, like do your training, like take your time, and drew back and the pin was probably not even where I was aiming, but it was good enough. And anyway, I settled the pin, took the shot, and I just remember watching the arrow zip straight through that fox and it essentially jumped up in the air and fell in the rabbit hole and expired there and then. And I just remember the immediate confusion as to like where it had gone and thinking, oh, like, no, I've lost it. Where's it gone? And just the panic of obviously, shooting an animal for probably the first time. I can't remember, maybe shot rabbits before then, but just the confusion and panic. And then realizing like, hey, you did everything right. You settled the pin. It should be just there somewhere. And I remember walking up after a couple of minutes to that spot where I thought I'd see a bit of blood and the fox was just lumped there in a pile in the hole. And I remember just like the pride and satisfaction of being able to carry that fox back to Dad who was cutting timber and like I was obviously stoked. Like the smile on my face would have been immense. And then seeing like that resonate in Dad who stopped cutting timber immediately and just like the joy in his face. James came back from his hunt and was stoked. Like it was just this family achievement of, something that looking back now, it's quite a novel sort of achievement shooting a fox. But at that time it was like, one arrow kill effectively, humanely by myself, executed which way I wanted to walk from the car, like making all those decisions myself to the point where I remember we actually got that fox taxidermied, which is pretty funny. But it
ugliest taxidermist you'll ever see.
It just goes to show like those milestones are important. And yeah, I'll let James take over and share a story. I'm sure he's got one, but just, yeah, it's funny how that will stay with me forever. It's just that little hunt.
See, my story in terms of controlling my sort of buck fever, I guess, is probably a later one in the sense that the one I think about for sure is my first Jittle stag, because I just had such a rough trot in terms of, I can't even remember how many, it was a crazy amount of stalking opportunities before I actually successfully got one. And obviously Chittle being renowned for jumping the string and ducking and weaving and stuff. I remember, I think I'd missed 2 or 3 and maybe hit 1 high or something like that. And sort of backstrapped it, obviously shooting a sort of not so fast bow in the earlier years, but then being fortunate enough to move up to Townsville when I first started university from Melbourne. And I remember, putting in a fair bit of time and on this particular hunt, found a Chittle stag, and it was early morning and had just left the mob, and I remember following it and sort of went into this thick clump of tea tree and sort of anticipated that given the time morning it was going to bed, and sort of did a bit of a loop to get the wind in a bit better circumstances, and was sort of moving in on this tea tree clump. And I remember just seeing the antlers sticking up out of the grass. It was, in sort of March, so it had quite high leaf litter, and ended up stalking into 18 meters and it was bedded. And because I was so close, I think I just, the whole time stalking in, because I ended up getting in this sort of little gut, I guess, that was maybe like a foot deep, and just like crawling my whole way in there. And the whole way in there, I knew that it was going to be like a close shot. And so I think there was so many times that I'd literally close my eyes and just be like, just breathe, calm down, like take a breath. He's not going anywhere. The wind's really good. And end up getting into that 18 meters, and I just drew back and I took out the top of his heart. I opened him up, so I took out the top of his heart and his trachea all at once. And I just remember he's like, the arrow zipped through him. He stood to his feet and like put his head down, and I just remember all this blood just started like pouring out of his mouth. And then all of a sudden he just like crashed to the ground, like did not take a step, anything like that. But it was just like this monumental moment. It was actually, I'm pretty sure it was my first like proper stag. Like I think I'd taken deer before, but it was definitely like my first sort of higher end sort of trophy, I guess. But I think it was just, the moments and the lessons leading up to that, and especially just around controlling like your buck fever and controlling your emotions leading up to the shot. That was like a huge sort of transition for me, especially like leading into sort of these bigger hunts. Controlling that buck fever and emotion. If it's time for you to get a new pair of hiking or hunting boots, then go no further than Lowers. We have been running the Lower Ranger GTX3s across Australia, New Zealand and the US for many years now without ever getting a blister. We're so happy with their service, we reached out to Lower to get a discount code for you, our listeners, so that you can go and try them yourselves. Use Twin Elements 10, that is TWINELEMENTS 10 at checkout for 10% off your next order.
That's probably a good segue into our next topic, but I think as a bit of a sign off on the early years of our hunting with Dad and like the intro into it all would be just if you do have kids at home, I think not rushing the process, letting them find their way a little bit, obviously giving them all the tools to equip themselves and giving them opportunities to go out hunting and things like that. But it may not click for them, your kids, until they're actually doing their own hunts later on. But definitely with the reward for effort put in early days, they will be set on the right path, is probably my viewpoint on the whole thing. And just before we jump to the next little section, Mum actually sent in a bit of a funny topic here to add to the lizard story from earlier. She just wanted, Nick, if you could please elaborate on the funny mud story from when we were approximately 5 years old.
It wasn't funny. I was really angry with a pair of you because what happened was the property that we had access to had a huge pig population, but a lot of them were living in Kabungi, and unfortunately it was hard.
Kabungi, for people that aren't aware, is a sort of massive reed that's ranges between 6 to 12 feet high.
Yeah,
that the pigs just love.
It's a very thick, I think they're called cattails actually. They're common name.
Just if you haven't
but,
heard of
and all the pigs would go and bed in there, and you couldn't hunt them. It was just too thick. It was not penetrable. Anyway, the farmer or the station manager was going to burn it all back, and he instructed myself and a few other family members at the time if they didn't like the pigs, obviously there, and if you wanted to partake in a cull, a few of us. I think I was the only one in my family group that's ever continually only hunted with a bow. So I said I'd love that. We had the boys being looked after, and for those out there, I use the inverted commas looked after. They were to be sitting in a particular area with the station manager, and we were going to spread out and try to take out some pigs. Anyway, when I got back, both my boys were covered in mud, and what had happened was obviously the station owner had his hands full trying to light the fire and make sure the fire was safe and everything, and the boys were left to their own, I guess, playful means, and they ended up being covered in mud. They had mud fights, and they were literally covered head to toe in mud, and it wasn't fun at all.
See, all I remember from this was the fact that we got stripped down to our jocks afterwards, and it may have been hot when we were having the mud fight, but I just remember when we drove back, we used to have like a little Suzuki that we used to drive around the property. And I remember Dad getting us to stand on the back in our jocks and freezing our absolute arse off while he drove back to camp as a lesson to next time sit still where he told us to stay rather than jumping into a swamp essentially and throw mud at each other, as fun as it was at the time.
Yeah, it would have started off as harmless fun where one of us were making a mud ball or something like that, and then the other one probably pushed him in or whatnot, and then that would have escalated to a full-blown fist fight, and both of us getting covered in mud up to our eyeballs. But yeah, I just remember vividly thinking, like, I look at dogs now in a dog box on the back of a ute, and I think that's literally what it would have been like. It's James and I sitting there in our jocks, freezing cold, whilst Dad sits in the front going, what am I doing taking these boys hunting? They're pains in the ass, but it obviously all came to fruition full circle. In my mind, there's a pretty distinct period from that early days when we were sort of following your suit, obviously, and learning how to hunt and things like that when we became proficient in hunting, obviously with feral pigs, goats, foxes and rabbits and things like that. And then there was certain challenges associated with like more of the deer species and unknown critters that we are sort of hunting now as adults. But in that middle period, there was definitely a point in my mind where we became less interested in, I guess, just shooting and killing things, and more interested in capturing the hunt. I remember there was a period of time where, like, if Dad, for example, was stalking in on a mob of pigs and we had a handy cam or a camcorder or a point and shoot camera, something like that, it was like, okay, if Dad's stalking them, I want to follow this hunt with that. And there was definitely a point in time in my mind where sort of the filming of these hunts and the recording of these hunts became like a massive part of our life, to the point where, Dad, you can probably talk to this a little bit, but I remember in my early teens, we'd finish school for the week, and on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like if you were working, I would ask to get dropped off from first light till last light on a Saturday, and essentially just go and video deer or pigs or rabbits, foxes in the local areas, or on private property that we had access to. Do you remember like just how committed we were to that, I guess? And you probably remember the fuel bills and all these type of things. But
one story comes to mind, and you've got beautiful photos to back it up, was you found a nest of a willy wagtail somewhere, one of the properties, and you said, oh, look, can you make me a makeshift stand? And I think you were a couple of metres off, and you were there for about 5 hours. I dropped you off in the morning. You just wanted to take, I think you had the whole lifestyle from them building the nest to the chicks hatching, being fed, you know, and then it was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments where, oh, well, you tell the story. You were there.
Yeah, well, as you were alluding, I was sort of there documenting it was multiple weeks. I remember just being pretty
mesmerised.
Yeah, and just dedicated to trying to capture from the moment, like these willy wagtails, which are a small species of Australian native bird. Like I remember them picking hair off the horses on the property, and then they'd line the nest with the hair and collect spider webs and build these little web nests and things on this little perch. And I watched that whole process lay out until they had 4 eggs in the nest and the parents incubated it, and then 4 little chicks. And then these were sort of, I don't know, probably a week old. They were starting to get quite big as far as chicks go. And I remember this particular day just doing the same as I'd done for many days previous, of sitting there and trying to photograph the adults. You know, there were times I'd sit there and wait for, you know, a whole day just to get 10 opportunities of a bird coming in with a little beetle or a bug or something like that and feed the chick. And you had like a chick of the shutter of the camera, or, you know, to anticipate when to hit record on the video before they might not come back for a couple of hours. So again, that's just like one of those lessons in patience. And sure, you might be able to see other things in the distance or in the surrounding area, but it was waiting for that action obviously took a toll. But this particular day, I remember the parents come back to the nest, and they'd become quite attributed with me being there, had no issue with feeding the young there. Like I was in a spot that wasn't really a threatening spot to them and could watch them go about their natural behaviour. And I remember just hearing their like chittering sort of alarm call going off, and I thought, oh, it's a bit odd. Like they're normally pretty happy with me. Maybe first thing in the morning when I walk towards the nest, they'll do it. But once I'm set in my spot and sort of in the little blind off the ground, I'm normally pretty good. But I remember just thinking something unusual of it, and it took about 20 or 30 seconds for me to realise what was going on. But they were doing an alarm call, and a tiger snake was coming out from it. It had come from a blackberry bush, gone to the base of this tree that they had their nest in, and sort of ended up scaling the tree. And I'd never seen up until that point, a tiger snake be sort of arboreal and climb trees. And pretty savvy and quickly, this tiger snake did not care about the birds, which were like swooping it at this point, trying to hit it, collide with it and deter it from eating their young. But long story short, it essentially came up this branch, went right up to the nest, and it ended up eating and sort of plucking from the nest 3 out of the 4 young chicks, to the point where it was probably quite full. And that transpired over about half an hour, where I was able to take some pretty cool photographs, some like average footage, but it's just one of those nature spectacles that speak for itself. But the funny backstory is that I actually had just purchased my first like digital SLR camera. I think it was like 3 or 4 days before this event. So I'd upgraded, which is like just, a bit of a fluke, and was lucky to do that because some of the photos are actually really quite interesting. But again, just that's probably one of those moments where the patience and willingness to go and photograph wildlife and things like that had played its course, and definitely a moment that I remember and will remember forever.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think you still got that on. Is that on your YouTube channel? That little...
Yeah, there is a little snippet from that on the YouTube
collection
channel.
of photos, yeah. No, that was amazing, especially coming, I love birds, and obviously that's something that is a natural interaction. There is a food chain there, so yeah, amazing.
I even speaking now of YouTube, I remember that's probably the first thing that we started. I remember way back in the day, I was only quite young, but with your permission, obviously, I think you probably even had to set up an account on the Australian Hunting Forum, starting on there and sharing some of our like adventures and videos of us, some of the wildlife we were seeing, the feral pigs, just live footage and things, and then it escalated to me videoing your hunts or me videoing James's hunts or vice versa, and that sort of then translated to, I remember as like a young teenager probably by this stage, getting the praise of adults who were in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s online being like, mate, some of this footage and photographs is like phenomenal. And I remember that just motivated us more as like a little family of 3 that were hunting together to be like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, not many people are doing this. And this is back in the day where YouTube was just kicking off, and would definitely with confidence be able to say that like, we were one of amongst the first to certainly be doing hunting videos like in Australia on YouTube many, many years ago, which is just cool to see where it's like escalated to now. But
I think only now you guys have, in recent ones, have made it more cinematographic, if that's the right word, where you've sort of blended, you've made it more like a mini documentary. But I can recall some of your earlier videos. I don't know if you ever did anything with them, but what I saw of them where you just go in with a whistle to a particular property and just call up foxes. I don't even think you had your bow whistles. I can't remember. But you had foxes coming in everywhere, and and you come back, how'd you go? Oh, I called in 5 foxes, and, we'd look at the video and it was just incredible, And that was a pretty unique interaction. But obviously that's all groundwork, isn't it?
Yeah, there were certain properties where that was just near your work there at a just like a public park, and I'd go there and photograph birds and things around wetlands, and remember seeing heaps of foxcat and the odd fox, and thought one day I'm just going to go and take a fox whistle and essentially just educate wild foxes. I wasn't able to obviously hunt them legally, so I didn't have a bow or anything like that, but it was more just that muscle memory and learning how, like, where to set up, and obviously you want to be in the shade. And I learned from an early age that 8 out of 10 times if I was uphill from the fox's approach, it led to a encounter where I whistled them into my ambush position a lot better than if I was below them, and things like this, and making sure that there's a certain level of cover that you need to be not seen and things like that. And then that just translated to when the situation was right, where we did have access on, private property or whatnot, and we were able to hunt, that we were able to obviously, get it done more commonly than not. Was there a moment for you, Dad, where you sort of realised that obviously the hunting wasn't just, something that we enjoyed doing with you, but there was a passion there that was going to lead to us doing it by ourselves and sort of take on that tradition?
No, absolutely. I think that one of the proudest moments when I realised that you upped the ante was when both James and yourself started hunting on your own, and in particular we had access to really rolling hills and some deep gullies, and we're mainly targeting sambar deer, and we'd all spread out because the property was so huge, and we'd all go to our own little spots. And this particular time, you, Ayden, were first successful at shooting a deer species that I hadn't got at any point. I think it was a sambar spiker, and we enjoyed that for many months. And then shortly after that, very similar area as well. I think you'll go and run off a scrape. James ended up securing a good young spiker as well, yeah. So I think that's when I realised that you were both, achieving things that a lot of other bow hunters hadn't done before, and you were still relatively both young. So for me, that was when I noticed that you were very serious, very passionate, very committed, and of course very capable. But also, I guess the other aspect was that you were more concerned about trying to get out and go hunting and less about going partying and, drinking and all the other stuff. So we were mainly concentrating on doing family hunts than you guys socialising.
So before we transition into sort of some of our more recent hunts and sort of Ayden and I taking over and leading the charge on some of these hunts, one story that I'd like you to share at my detriment is a little story and a hunt that we had for some feral goats in New South Wales to do with some walkie-talkies. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Do you want to share that with the listeners?
Well, as Ayden touched on earlier, I tried to make the boys feel part of the journey, so they all had their rightful tools, bags, binoculars, walkie-talkies, boots, whatever. And I think they were probably about 11 or 12 at the time. And I remember saying to both of them, please make sure that your walkie-talkies are charged, ready for tomorrow, because it's going to be a big day. We know where the mob is. We're going to get in there, but we need our walkie-talkies. So, yep, Dad. And we set off, and I think we just scrambled for the walkie-talkies, our bows and everything. And James, I always need to keep James on a short lead. He always would go walkabouts. But I don't know why, just this particular hunt, I thought, he understood my instructions, go 40, 50 metres and just parallel. You keep a lookout for me, I'll be in the middle. Ayden go on the right. Anyway, unknown to me, he hadn't charged his walkie-talkie. So I end up grabbing his walkie-talkie, and Ayden got onto the mob of goats, and next minute I'm trying to call James in, and my walkie-talkie was dead. I can just hear a bit of crackling, and I can hear, Dad, where are you? Dad, where are you? I think I'm lost. And then I'm trying to go towards him, and at the same time, Ayden's on really tight on this decent billy at the time, and if he had got that, it would have been an amazing trophy for him. So I quickly rush off trying to get his attention. Ayden gives me the hoo-fard look like, man, you've broken every protocol you've taught me. I'm in the zone. I'm trying to, put an arrow on the string, and I whispered in his ear, I said, your brother's lost and we have to go and find him. I can't repeat what he said. I said, mate, he is your brother and he's lost. There's plenty of goats.
You can say what he said.
No, he said, fuck him. He said, I want this goat. I said, mate, we have to go and get your brother. He's lost. And he goes, no way, I want this goat. And I physically had to sort of just drag him, and, he was pissed off, one pissed off boy. And rightly so, he was in the zone. He had got into bow range. In the interim, I'm trying to get onto James and say, listen, mate, one click, yes, two clicks, no. Can you hear me? And he's like, Dad, I'm about to cross this river and Dad, or creek. And I'm like, my God, where is he? But anyway.
I would like to form a rebuttal and my defense to this story, because I'm not sure about the whole walkie-talkie charging part, but I remember when you were trying to call me in and I was on one side of the creek and you guys were on the other side of the creek, and we hadn't realised that the creek had forked and gone into a Y. And so when you said come and cross the creek, I crossed the first branch of the creek, and then obviously being on an island, pretty much immediately hit water again. And you were like, no, I only crossed the water once.
Yeah.
And then obviously being very confused, but you guys obviously were across the next
I don't know.
You
You had me lost at 50 metres, and always keep a lookout for me, please. But anyway, it was one of those opportunities that they always still argue about. And look, he was a decent billy. I reckon he would have gone about 36, 37 inches, which was pretty good for the property. And
still very good.
And one that Ayden, I think he got to about 14, 15 metres, was quite thick lignum, I think it was. And they were in a really good patch, a lot of green. And, unfortunately, that never come to play out as we wanted to. But
Moral of the story, people, charge your walkie-talkies and equipment, and if you get lost, stop moving. Someone will come and find you. And if you're by yourself, think fast.
And shoot the goat first and go back and find your brother second.
Agreed. Cayuga broadheads are engineered for success and built by experience. These are the broadheads we trust for all of our bow hunts. Whether it's elk in Montana, buffalo and bangtang bulls in Australia's Northern Territory, or tahr in New Zealand, we have ultimate confidence in their range. James is currently shooting the 150 grain pilot cuts with bleeders, whilst I'm currently loving the 150 grain Zots. Regardless of your preferred broadhead, quality performance is guaranteed across the range.
No, I think sort of transitioning now to some of our more recent hunts, especially Ayden and I, looking at, I remember in detail personally when I think it shifted from, when we were going hunting with Dad to when we started sort of pioneering the way a little bit and going on our own hunts. And for me, that moment was because we'd gone to Western Australia to hunt pigs, we'd gone to New South Wales a lot to hunt, pigs and goats, we'd gone to Charters Townsville to go and hunt chital deer a lot. So I think the first sort of big hunt for Ayden and I that I really remember was a new experience was when Ayden, Nick Morton and I went to New Zealand for the first time. I think we were sort of early 20s. And that was a big hunt in multiple facets in the sense of it was obviously a whole new country. So getting there had its own rules and regulations that you had to look up, but also just logistics wise, like hiring a car, getting to where you're hunting, but also like it was a backpack style hunt too. So having all that gear and carrying in your pack, but also being, equipped for the weather and the conditions that we were going to face. And we certainly learnt sort of the hard way, I guess, looking back on it now. The research had well and truly fell short. And we'll do a lot of podcasts on backpack hunts and all the lessons and whatnot that we've learnt. But I think for us, that was definitely a huge step, which obviously now has taken us to do a lot of hunts all over the world and in some pretty cool locations for some absolute crazy critters. But for me anyway, that was definitely a turning point in our sort of hunting careers going forwards and really taking that next step to go on some of these bigger hunts.
Another development that I think sort of like really established now with us is just that neither of us are very selfish, and that obviously shines through from Dad. But now we'll essentially go on hunting trips with whatever the species is, and unless there's opportunity for both of us to hunt, on a week-long trip or something like that. But if it's a couple of days, one of us will put the hand up and be like, all right, you've never done this before, or you're equipped right now to do it. The bow hunting side of things a little bit better. I'll film, and vice versa. And like obviously, and a good example of that is probably that USA trip that we went on last year, I believe, where I essentially followed you around for 30 days or just under a month, while you had a limited entry elk tag. And it was essentially like both of us were hunting. I'll remember that. Like people say to me, oh, does that not bother you that your brother shot an elk? And I'm like, mate, we were both there at 40 meters when he loosed the arrow. Like it could have been either of us to catch that on film. And it's more the actual morale boosters that are along the trip that no one else will ever see, that are sort of behind the camera. They're some of the more important things than who actually shoots the animal at the end of the day. There are so many of our hunts that we've filmed that don't result in anyone shooting anything, or hunts that last, I remember a chital deer hunt that we had lasted about 14 months, where we were searching for one particular stag, and that hunt had about, 7 or 8 different trips within that we went home empty-handed, but the memories and the footage and things that we have we'll never forget. So that's probably like when we just find out like recent hunts and how we've sort of matured as hunters. It's more about just enjoying the time spent outdoors, enjoying the company, a lot of the benefits of just escapism, as Dad alluded to earlier, being able to get out of the confines of the city and work life and all that type of stuff. And be able to go hunting with, your best mates.
Absolutely, Ayden. I mean, we've just come back from the Northern Territory. I didn't take a bow up and I just followed you guys around. It was an amazing trip. I think the amount of balls you shot, I was there within 20 metres and, it was incredible. Just some of the bird life and the landscapes, the crocs, the buffs, everything was just, all the different Bangtang bulls. It was like I was there hunting myself. So, yeah, I concur.
Yeah, it certainly got to that point now that, especially around the filming side with Ayden and I, that it really does not matter who's holding the bow. Like, I know a lot of the hunts we've planned this year already and allocated time to, it's sort of got to a point that it's just like, oh, you can go and shoot and hunt. And it's like, oh, no, you can. Like, it's almost like, nah, like we're both sort of that not really fussed about it. That, it depends on who shot it last or who's keen in the mood to hunt and be in front of the camera at the time. But yeah, it's especially like what those two hunts that Ayden alluded to with hunting in the US and definitely that Chiddle hunt, it just makes me think like, we do spend so much time behind the camera and trying to document those hunts and journeys that we go through on these hunts and how much more of a process it is, and how much probably more successful we could be as hunters if we weren't both there, or multiple sometimes if we're following someone else, for example, and how many more critters we probably personally could get on the deck if it was just me hunting by myself or Ayden hunting by himself. But, it wouldn't have the same feeling for us if we were just out hunting by ourselves as if, to accomplish and get it on film and make that video for you guys to be able to share it, because it just, it's gotten to that point now that it sort of encapsulates what we do. It almost feel like cheating if we just went out and shot something. Dad, is there any time specifically for you, looking back, that you sort of noticed that, I guess, we'd had that transition from sort of us following you around to you sort of maybe coming on hunts more so with us and hunts that we've sort of planned? Obviously, you mentioned the Bantang hunt that we went on recently, but is there any other hunts that come to mind?
I think for me was securing 2 Chiddle deer with Ayden in a 4-day block. I'd previously hunted Chiddle for 15 years and with some amazing guides and always been close, but obviously the shot never presented or they jumped the string. But this particular trip, I don't know what I noticed. I mean, I always thought Ayden, both you and Ayden, have had an amazing hunting IQ and, patience and all the rest of the stuff that makes you a good hunter. But this particular trip, like I said, I secured 2 decent representative stags. Yeah, in 2 days was just, I don't know if it was luck or it was just good planning, but it's one of the trips I'll always remember and always be grateful for. And, I take my hat off to Ayden. He had everything planned. He'd done a lot of scouting beforehand. He knew, in a rough proximity where they were. And it was a quick kill, amazing. Like, we got on film, so it was just tick, 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 a bucket list for me. And it's something that, I've got both deer mounted and I look at them and I relive the memory and, more importantly, the journey I had getting there. But having Ayden by my side was incredible.
I sort of remember that James and I, up until that point, had taken like a Chiddle stag or a couple of Chiddle stags each and was sort of figuring them out piece by piece, like with the benefit of living up in Townsville in North Queensland for uni. And one of the bits of this hunt that I really remember is the pressure I put on myself to like scout the property where we were hunting regularly for the weeks leading up to it. I remember sending Dad plenty of pictures, tuning in with him, being like, make sure you're shooting your bow, like similar things that he obviously would have spent, 15 years as we were young kids, building us up through the process of make sure you're shooting your bow between the trip. I want you shooting tennis balls at 30 metres and this and pick your spots and make sure your gear's ready and all this sort of stuff. It was funny to sort of go through that process and feel the nerves of like, yeah, I'm taking Dad on this trip. I've organised the car, I've organised the food, the fuel, all this other stuff, the property. I've spoken with the property owners. It's all lined up. The dates are ready to go. The hunt's ready to go. I've got particular stags in mind. You know, I've been hunting them pretty regularly. All these sort of factors. And then obviously just having the nerves of like, I didn't necessarily have control because Dad was the one pulling back the bow and being the hunter. I was just filming it. And then to see that translate into Dad achieving his goals, and he'd put the work in and then was able to take 2 exceptional stags, as he mentioned, was just like it was a tables sort of turned or roles reversed sort of moment for me. And it was probably one of my fondest hunting memories as well. But it also, I remember it was pretty powerful because it like propelled us to do more of it. I remember straight after that trip being like, Dad, I've got an offer through a good mate of mine to go and hunt buffalo in the Northern Territory. Shout out to Big Country Safaris. And he opened the window to, you know, the Northern Territory, and he was good enough to offer for Dad to come on that trip as well. And I remember, like, again, I filmed Dad shoot a magnificent buffalo bull in very short duration after that chittle deer hunt. And then that went on to James and Dad hunting for the fallow rut and boars up in the basalt wall country, and all these hunts that James or I had sort of navigated and planned out logistically that Dad was now coming on. So it's very rewarding to see it all come full circle from, again, going out as 4-year-olds as a little family and Dad taking us out to now we're taking him out as adults, and you know, still continuing with this tradition of hunting is pretty amazing. Whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, or any activity in the great outdoors, Dog and Gun Coffee is ready to fuel your next adventure. Their preloaded drip filters are a game changer and help you enjoy cafe quality coffee in the wild. Use code TWIN10 at checkout for $10 off your next order. That's code TWIN10, TWIN 10. Their Samba blend is my personal favourite. Discover yours today.
Well, hopefully that's given you guys a bit of insight into our upbringing and what got us into hunting and sort of, I guess, our journey throughout the earlier stages and leading into our more recent hunting endeavours. Obviously, we're going to dive into a lot more of these topics in more detail in future podcasts, but we've just got to the point in the show where we answer some of your frequently asked questions that you guys send through either via email or via Instagram. So if you guys want to feature on some future podcasts, make sure to send an email to our email at info@twinelements.com.au. I'll repeat that again, info@twinelements.com.au. And if you could put the subject title as FAQ, then that way we can collate them all and answer them in podcasts in the future or do specific FAQ podcasts in a whole. The other alternative is if you want to just send Ayden or I a message on Instagram, either Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors or James Doumtsis Outdoors or even the Twin Elements one, and we'll tag them in there and then answer them in a later podcast. So one that's just come in recently was, what is your favourite Australian animal to hunt?
We'll let Dad start off this one. I've got a feeling I sort of know what he's going to say.
Oh, for me, absolutely. I love the basalt boars. There is nothing that gets the heart racing, only because they do poke you back, and so everything has to go perfectly well. And a little bit earlier on, we're talking about, you know, noises and the kangaroo ear flick. You know, they just hear a bird take off for whatever reason on the swamp. The big boars don't even hang around. They're gone. So it's a huge challenge. Sometimes deer will give you a second chance maybe, but wild boars, they see you, smell you, hear you, gone. They don't muck around. So, yeah, for me, wild boars.
I think for me, it's got to be the majestic red stag. I haven't probably put as much time into them as I'd like, and hopefully in years to come, now being based in Armidale and getting a few of my own blocks, I'm starting to do a bit more groundwork and sort of, get my own access. But, definitely that, you know, the raw, the rut, sort of playing that game, cat and mouse, of calling them in. And I just love it. It's probably why I love hunting elk as well. But just that sort of interaction that you can get with them. Sort of that cat and mouse, trying to outsmart them and call them in. I mean, spot and stalk's obviously fantastic, and love that sort of play. But yeah, definitely that interaction that you get from calling them. There's nothing better than having a huge red stag roaring and coming in on a string to a hind call or another roar or something like that. So for me, there's probably, nothing that gets my heart pumping like a big red stag.
I'm going to have to go with the prettiest deer on the planet, the Chiddle deer or Axis deer. I'm biased. I've set up a guided hunting company to try and pursue these and get others to pursue them. So again, I feel like they're a very big part of my heart, but I just love the opportunities that you get on them. You see a lot of them, and then it's truly a test of patience and a bit of luck and whatnot. But there's definitely a process into making sure that more times than not you can get successful, and it's very addictive. But that was our answers from us. We had, what is your favourite Australian species to hunt? Nick said boars, James said red deer stags, and I went with chiddle deer. For our next question, we'll start with Nick and work our way around the table. What species are you most excited to hunt in 2025?
That's easy for me because I want to have or complete the Grand Slam of Australian deer, and so my last species is red deer. Yeah, I'll give it a crack this year, or next year I should say, sorry. But the other thing is I think I want to go to New Zealand for tahr. I want to try to plan that and possibly a bangtang, but red deer's on my list. Sorry, that's 3.
That's fine. I've got 2 on my mind. I'm pretty keen shortly actually to sort of pursue and chase some velvet bucks. There's been a couple that I've been watching grow out, and it's just an exciting new hunt that obviously hunted fallow plenty of times before in the rut, but never really played that chess game with them in the velvet stage, and sort of grown and had that sort of intimate relationship with them while you sort of literally watch them grow out through their velvet. So like I said, there's a couple of bucks that I've been watching. It'll be about a month between when I last saw them just before Christmas to when I'm going to be targeting them in late Jan. But I'm really excited to hopefully sort of get one of them on the ground. Another one is an animal similarly I haven't really been able to put a lot of time into, and that's a mule deer. And that's pretty much just because it's off my own sort of back, really, where I've had a tag 2 years in a row when I've gone over to Montana. But I guess just prioritise the elk component of it, and especially in my second year with the sort of premium limited entry tag, just ran out of time. But in the first year, I only really had like a day and a half after getting my elk to hunt, and got really close to, in hindsight, actually really good buck, which I didn't sort of realise at the time, and just probably just from fatigue, only getting a couple of hours of sleep a night and doing massive Ks, just stuffed up in the final moments of the stalk when I was like 20 metres off this buck, and just sort of took an extra step when I shouldn't have, and it ran off. But so I've definitely got mule deer on my mind and really, really want to put some time into them this year, or next year I should say, 2025. Ayden and I have some pretty big plans to head over to the US and give ourselves ample time, but also going to be having hopefully a few tags between us and trying to film them all. So we might be a bit time poor again, but yeah, definitely want to put some time into a good muley in 2025.
I'll follow similar suit. This year, I didn't draw any tags last year in the US, similar to James. This year, sorry, in 2024. But the benefit of that is that in 2025, I'll be going into Montana with an approximately like 80% chance for a general elk tag, which I'm really excited for. If I can have 1/100th of a hunt as successful as what James did a couple of years ago, then that will be absolutely magical. I'm not expecting to have the same amount of bugling bull elk, but it's just one of those things that there's something about essentially carrying all the gear on your back, having your best mate with you, and then just plenty of time. We'll probably dedicate most of the month of September again to going out there and completing a goal. Whether it happens or not, I'm not too sure, but it's just one of those things that the mental clarity that you get from doing a hunt like that is incredible. The highs and lows are the highest and the lowest in life. You sort of can go from one day being like you had the best encounter ever, like I'm going to shoot a bull elk, to obviously not shooting that bull elk and then thinking I'm never going to see another bull elk again, all in the space of a couple of minutes. And just riding that roller coaster is purely addictive. So I'm going to say a big bull elk. Alrighty, well, it's come to that time of the podcast where we are going to wrap everything up. If you are looking forward to some rut activity, hunting fallow and red deer in the coming months, then our friends over at Venture Hunting Outdoors are having their rut bundles drop in the near future. So keep an eye out over their website, their socials and our socials, as well as on the 14th and 15th of Feb 2025, we will be at the Springwood store in Brisbane for Venture Hunting Outdoors, doing a bit of a meet and greet and, catching up with you guys, doing some live Q&As and tips and tricks for the rut. We're very keen to be there in person doing that. As always, please make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast, our YouTube channel and all of our social medias. Just to keep up to date with all the content that we're releasing. And if you could please flick us a review of this podcast, that would be greatly appreciated as we get it up and running. As always, if you have any topics that you want us to address in the future, podcast topics, we have a bit of an idea as to what we sort of want you guys to hear and what we want to share. But if you guys could send through an email to info@twinelements.com.au with the subject line podcast, letting us know what you want to hear, that would be amazing. Alrighty, thank you for tuning in, legends, and thank you very much to our special guest and our father, Nick Doumtsis. We appreciate everything that you've done for us. Love you dearly and can't wait for many, many more hunts together. It's going to be incredible.
I'm excited, thank you. And good luck to all those new mum and dads out there trying to get their kids into bow hunting and the outdoors. Worth it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.